Muy buenas tardes a todas. Muy buenas tardes a todas. ¿Cómo están? A todos los que nos acompañan el día de hoy a nuestra cuarta sesión del entrenamiento para ser un futuro navegador de salud mental del programa Mental Health Matters Importa. Me da mucho gusto el día de hoy verlas y verlos de nuevo a todos. Estamos listos para comenzar. El día de hoy es una sesión muy importante. Como pueden ver, vamos a hablar de la intervención en crisis y prevención del suicidio. Y no vamos a hacerlos esperar porque tenemos una presentación bastante pues cargada de información y con nuestra presentadora y no vamos a hacer esperar más, ¿verdad? Entonces vamos a comenzar precisamente con nuestra sesión. Y pues para que nada, vamos a celebrar a todas las personas que ya llevan mucho, pero mucho avance en las lecciones, lección 3 y lección 4. Felicidades, vemos su gran esfuerzo reflejado, lo vemos aquí también en la sesión, entonces continúen así, ya vamos casi en la recta final, entonces es importante que continúen para que podamos, pues ahora sí que tener a tiempo todos sus certificados y finalizar este entrenamiento con los mejores resultados. Pero muchas gracias a todas. Y bueno, vamos a hacer el reconocimiento de la tierra. Me gustaría llamar a Sandra para que nos haga este recordatorio, como siempre, que nos gusta realizar. Sandra, ¿estás por ahí?
Sí, un momentito, estoy buscando cómo poner ambas pantallas al mismo tiempo, pero muy tarde para tratar de hacer eso. Ok, el reconocimiento de la tierra. Queremos reconocer que estamos parados en el territorio y en las aguas de los pueblos de la costa de Salish. Como invitados no invitados, estamos operando en las tierras que bordean las aguas compartidas por todas las tribus pertenecientes a las naciones Suquamish, Tulalip y Muckleshoot. También reconocemos que muchos pueblos esclavizados y contratados se vieron obligados a dedicar su trabajo a la construcción de lo que ahora es Seattle y sus alrededores. Por estos pueblos y sus descendientes, reconocemos su huella imborrable en el espacio en el que nos reunimos para este evento. Finalmente, al reconocer que esta tierra es territorio indígena colonizado, que ha sido diseñado a través de esclavos y mano de obra contratada, es nuestra responsabilidad colectiva interrogar críticamente las historias y las vidas posteriores de estos eventos, al igual que honrar y proteger y sostener esta tierra.
Muchas
Gracias.
gracias, Sandra. Y ahora pues vamos con un recordatorio un poco de las etiquetas de Zoom con Ana.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Espero que estén bien. Buenas tardes. Ah, Recuerden que estamos aquí todos en Zoom y que es la mejor experiencia si todas las personas hacen su esfuerzo para participar bien y ayudar a los otros. Así que recuerden tener su micrófono apagado. Es importante para que no interrumpa. Y también traten de concentrarse. Esto es un tiempo para ustedes de aprendizaje, un tiempo bueno para compartir. Así que les vamos a poner las energías lo más posible aquí. La próxima, por favor. Gracias. Y sí, recuerden que está la opción de levantar la manito virtual en sus controles de Zoom. Así que pueden usar eso cuando tengan una pregunta. Y recuerden también, por favor, que cambien su nombre. Si aparecen como iPhone o otra cosa que no es el nombre suyo, por favor, cambien su nombre para que lo podamos reconocer y tomar la asistencia a este evento. Próxima,
Muchas
por favor.
gracias.
Ya.
Muchas gracias, Anita. Y un rápido también recordatorio de la agenda, ¿verdad? Tuvimos nuestra bienvenida, reconocimiento de la tierra, funciones de traducción. Vamos a ver el calendario. Vamos a presentar a nuestra oradora del día de hoy con un tema súper importante de Forefront. Y después dejaremos lo que usualmente hacemos al principio, que es la revisión del módulo, la Padlet, y si nos da tiempo llegaremos al video, y si no, nos iremos a las preguntas, porque como les dije, es una sesión cargada de mucha información. Y bueno, nuestro calendario ya vimos, ya vamos por nuestra cuarta sesión, ¿verdad? Ya no estamos en la recta final, ya el próximo domingo será nuestra sesión número 5, que es el 18 de febrero, así que bueno, disfrutemos estos 2 últimos domingos que nos quedan. Y el día de hoy, como les dije, ya no las voy a hacer esperar más. Tenemos a Amy Paulson. Ella es una oradora que nos trae precisamente el tema del día de hoy de prevención del suicidio. Hemos tenido la grandísima oportunidad de trabajar con ella en varias ocasiones. Yo he asistido a algunos entrenamientos de esta asociación y son bastante interesantes. Ella nos va a hablar precisamente de este tema que es tan importante y que a veces es muy difícil de hablar, pero después de esto se van a dar cuenta que realmente es algo que quizás tenemos solamente que llamarlo por su nombre, ¿verdad? Entonces, queremos agradecer mucho a Amy por estar el día con nosotros y no hacemos más espera porque, como les digo, es un tema bastante, bastante importante y con muchísima información. Entonces, damos paso a Amy. Además, vamos a tener, antes de eso, ella habla inglés, pero vamos a tener disponible la traducción de inglés a español y para eso voy a traerles a Ana para que les explique rápidamente cómo acceder a quienes necesiten escucharlo en español, ¿verdad? Anita.
Gracias, Noemí. Sí, entonces, si quieren escuchar esta sesión en español con nuestras traductoras tan buenas que están aquí a ayudarnos con esto, y lo agradecemos mucho, que si están usando su computadora, busquen un botoncito que parece como un globo del mundo que dice interpretación o interpretation, y cuando le hacen clic allí, pueden abrir y en vez del audio original, seleccionen el español. Y después también, si están seleccionando español, también apaguen el audio original, porque si no van a tener los dos viniendo. Y si están en su teléfono inteligente, entonces estos controles están debajo de los tres punticos de más, y cuando abren eso, pueden ver que pueden buscar, van un poquito abajo, encuentran la primera, la interpretación, después se abre esta otra cosita que está la última foto, y donde ustedes también seleccionan en español para cambiarlo. Y no les hace falta apagar el audio original en su teléfono inteligente. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Anita. Y bueno, y si alguien tiene dudas, no dude en contactarnos ahorita por el chat para que podamos orientarlos cómo pueden acceder. Entonces, bueno, si no hay más por el momento, pues los dejo con Amy para precisamente comenzar el tema del día de hoy.
Is that my intro? For me to
Yes,
share
Amy, go
the
ahead.
screen?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to pull up the deck right here for us now. I'm very passionate about this topic that we're going to talk about here today, and I'm less good with technology. So thank you for your patience as I get all set up here. You are one of my favorite groups to be with every year, and so I'm so grateful for Jody and the team for having me back. I'm incredibly sorry that I do not speak Spanish. Ugh. I did grow up overseas and I speak Swedish fluently. And so I laugh because knowing Swedish fluently doesn't really help me very much, except for at IKEA shopping. And so I wish that I had grown up somewhere that I could speak Spanish. But thank you today for listening to the translators and letting me come, even though I don't speak Spanish. So thank you so much for being here. And if you haven't already filled out the pre-survey, I know that Anna put it in the chat for you as well. And so hopefully you'll have the chance to fill that out as we start out if you didn't do it already. So I want to make sure that you have that first link. And the second link there, if Anna puts it in the chat for you, what you'll see there is there's a packet. And in that packet has lots of parent information for you and regular information. So hopefully that will have some of it in Spanish and English for you. But some is for adults and some is for youth. So you'll have both sets to look, and we'll give you that link at the end of this training as well. But if you are willing to fill out our survey here on the front end and on the back end, it's in Spanish, that would be incredibly helpful. We mentioned that I'm from the University of Washington, and so we're always doing research, always trying to add information and knowledge to this field of suicidology. So that's why we have these surveys that are helpful for us. All right, well, we're going to jump into our material here today. And now suddenly my clicker is not working. So let's see, I'll try this different one instead. I think who knows what Noemi said about me or not, but if it was good, I'll take it. But I want you to know I'm here today with you as a community member. I am thrilled that you are in this program learning more skills to use in your community as a peer mentor. And here at Forefront, we believe deeply in peer mentors, and we train across Washington State and teach this curriculum to others, and they also teach it then to their family and their community. So whether you live down the street from me or in a different city or somewhere else in Washington, I am so grateful that you care enough about your community, that you're willing to learn these conversations, to have these difficult conversations about mental health, and that you care enough about those around you, that together we can make that big impact. So thank you again for being in this program, for having these conversations. I know they're not always easy. And yet, as a community member, as a parent here in Washington State, thank you that you care enough and that you're here learning this today. I also just want to say, I know with a topic like this today, it can be hard. And I know for many of you joining me today, you might have your own experiences with suicide. You might have your own experience with family members that you've lost or family members who've thought about suicide. And so today, as we have this conversation, we're talking about you and we're talking about me. And so although I've been in mental health for many years, the reason that I have this topic that I care about deeply and started working at Forefront and volunteering initially 7 years ago as a volunteer and then started working here 4 years ago was because my cousin Paul died by suicide. So I just want to make sure that as we talk about this, we're not talking about someone else's family, another part of the US. We're talking about here in our homes, in my home and in your home, in my story and your story. So be gentle with yourself today, but also just want to make sure and remind us of that. I mentioned we're at University of Washington. We're on the main campus here. I know Jody is on the Bothell one and things. And our hope is to help people take action to prevent suicide in their communities. And so how can we give tools, conversations, things for you to add that you can use? I've had people after this training talk about suicide with people they met at a dog park. I've had people say I talked with a stranger about it at the grocery store. So it's not only you can help others in your community or your friends or your family, but you might meet strangers and also have the opportunity to use these skills. So that's what our hope is at Forefront. And we're in the School of Social Work. That's where we're located right now. And then our training today, I think you guys already covered this, but I want you to know that you can get the slides. They haven't been sent already from our conversation today. So you can take notes if you want, but all these slides will be given to you. And we'll hopefully have some time here at the end for some more questions. It's a little hard to do them throughout our presentation since we have translation happening as well. And so I'm going to make sure that we spend most of our time covering material first. And then at the end, we can have more of a dialogue and have some more questions back and forth. And otherwise, I'll just count on the team maybe to interrupt me, especially if they're in Spanish and we need to do them between sections. So between the sections, I'll maybe mention a little bit if there's a question, and otherwise we'll move on quick because there's lots of material. So I mentioned to take care of yourself. If tonight you feel kind of heavy, you might feel sad, you might feel like a little darker, it might be because of this training. And so I'm really sorry. That's not the intent, but when we have these conversations, it can be hard. So the hope is today that you can engage, you can be courageous, you can wonder about how it might look like when I have this conversation with others. But also if this is too hard, I want to make sure that you text in the chat to one of the organizers and reach out to them and say, I really need to talk with someone, or this is really hard for me, and that you get the support even as I'm doing this training. So again, if it's too much for you, make sure you do something for self-care. And I also just want to acknowledge as we're having this conversation today, as someone who, we're all coming from different cultures, different backgrounds, different religions, maybe different family values. And so as you hear me talk about research today in this conversation, I know it can be hard. It can be hard to be thinking about within my culture, within my family, within my faith community, how do we talk about this? Is it allowed to be talked about? And does it match that what research is and how it's done, or whose voices are heard in research. So I want you to be keeping that in account. How do I integrate this within my community? And I know that you have that great support here at Mental Health Matters for that as well. But I just want you to know we don't spend as much time on this in the curriculum in this today as if maybe we were in a room together and we had the chance to explore a little bit together. How does this look? Can I talk about it within my community? Well, we're going to do 3 things together here today. The first thing we're going to do is talk about suicide as a public health issue and why people might consider suicide. The largest part of our training today is we're going to talk about suicide because I want to make sure when you leave here this afternoon that you can identify, understand, and be ready to support someone who might be at risk for suicide. And the third part we're going to do today is we're going to watch this video and we're going to see the steps that I'm going to show you being used. And we don't have time today for you to meet with a partner and try it out quite in the same way we would again if we were in the same room. But I hope that by watching the video, you can at least see someone trying these steps out and seeing how it might feel. So we'll have a little bit of a chance to practice, but not a ton today. We hope when you leave here today that you feel comfortable reaching out to someone that's in distress and not doing well, even though it might feel awkward and scary. You don't have to be a psychologist to have these conversations, we promise. I hope that you can say died by suicide, and we'll talk about what that language looks like in English and Spanish for you. And then add 24-hour crisis resources to your phone so that at any point you could, with someone, if you don't know what to do, you always can call those hotlines and the numbers and 988 and say, I'm sitting with someone and I'm worried for them, or I'm going to meet with them right now and I'm really worried for them. What do I do? Who do I refer them to? It's late at night. I don't know. Can we text with someone who's a professional, right? And then I want to make sure that you think about your home. What today can you do where you live to make sure to keep others safe if they're feeling suicidal? So that's something each of us will be thinking about here today as well. All right, we're going to jump right into talking about suicide, as I mentioned, and why it's a public health issue. So what we know is that suicide affects all communities. It's not one group of people. It's not one country in the world, right? It's not just one age group. It's not one race. It's everyone can be impacted by suicide. And so it's incredibly important that we have this conversation. There are some groups that have higher numbers. We know, for example, LGBTQ plus individuals. We know, for example, Alaska Natives. We know some groups have higher. We'll talk a little bit later. Men in general die from suicide more than women. So some of that we'll talk about, but it impacts all of us. And maybe if there's only one thing you remember today of my whole training, it's that asking about suicide doesn't cause suicide. And every time I go out in the community and talk about this, people are thinking, if I talk about suicide, I think I'm going to plant that in your head. You're going to think it from now on and it'll be my fault. And what we know from research is this is not the case. That actually talking about suicide is helpful. If I am alone on my journey and I'm feeling suicidal and I'm feeling overwhelmed and I am not doing well, when someone asks me about it, now I have someone that I could talk to about it. Someone that knows that secret that maybe I'm carrying. And it actually relieves stress for that person a little bit. And so if I'm not thinking about suicide and you ask me, I'm going to be like, yeah, no, I'm not thinking about suicide. I'm just really stressed today about school or life or my family. If I'm thinking about suicide, then I'm like, oh, actually I am. And I can actually talk to you about it. Like you're a safe person who can talk about really hard things. So please today, if nothing else of this whole day you remember, please remember that asking about suicide does not cause suicide. We also have in here that suicide is a rare event. For some people and groups that I work with, I just was with a group of veterans last week and they say, you know, Amy, suicide feels like it happens all the time. I lose friends and coworkers every year to suicide. And so we know that it can feel like it's a lot, but I want you to know that in the numbers later, when we look at statistics, it's still considered a rare event. So we throw that out there, and I know that can feel hard if you've been impacted in your life a lot by it. And then suicide results from many factors. I think when we watch movies or sometimes we hear articles or we hear stories about celebrities or people, it can feel like there's one thing that happened and then someone dies by suicide. What we know is it's not usually that way. That usually multiple things have been happening over a long period of time. And when they all come kind of together, that's when we know that someone sometimes decides to attempt their life. But it's not usually just one specific thing. We also want to make sure here that we know what protects against suicide, right? What are the strength-based areas today we can talk about, not just the losses of suicide. And so you, in your role as a peer mentor, look at the top area that protects against suicide. It's connections to friends, family, culture, and community. The role you play in your community already acts as a protective factor for the people in your community because you're involved, you care, you know people, and you show up for them. And now you're in this program where you're getting more skills, more information, more knowledge, and more resources that you can refer people to. So you and your role impacts. You can tell your friends and family, you can tell people in our communities that having community, having connection, our culture, all of those areas protect us from suicide. That's why we don't want people isolated and alone. Also, if we limit access to lethal methods, and lethal methods is a big word in English, I can only imagine in Spanish, but we want to make sure that when someone is in distress, when they're not doing well, when they're anxious and they're feeling suicidal, that they cannot access something that would end their life. That's why we want to make sure that things are locked up, that things are put away, or that if I am suicidal and I'm not doing well, that you as my friend maybe could hold my items for a while or do something so that I didn't have access just in
¿Qué
that
pasó?
crisis moment. Also, we know that
Estoy en mi clase, no estoy en el teléfono.
coping and problem solving skills are really important as well, so that we can always see different alternatives when things
Te
are
digo que
hard.
no hay tomates ni chiles verdes.
I am hearing somebody else's talk if we commute. Otherwise, that's okay too. Hopefully you can hear me and the translators. We also know that accessible physical and mental health care can be hard to access, but for when you know where to refer or where to access, it's really, really important. And I know that when we think across our state, it is not accessible to many people for lots of reasons. And specifically, often you can't get mental and physical support from someone in the healthcare field that speaks your language, understands you, and knows where you're coming from. And so that can be really hard here as well. Here are some statistics I'm going to share with you today, just so you know suicide here in the US. When we look at 2021, as you know, statistics come out a little bit later than when they measured them. So the most recent ones here we have are 21 and 23. About over 48,000 individuals lost their life to suicide. It's the 11th leading cause of death. When we talk about youth, there about 15% of those who died in 2021 then with those numbers were youth, which considers age 10 to 24. And for youth, for example, in Washington State, it's considered the second leading cause of death. And that's about what it is across the United States as well. It's about second or third if you look at the CDC. So if you have kids at home, for example, those are the numbers that it's about 1 in 10 kids that might attempt. And about 1 in 20 are going to have thought about it. For those kids in Washington State have thought about suicide. The highest rates, as I mentioned before, are among white males, American Indian, Alaska Native males, and Black males. So that's who die by suicide the most. That's not who try suicide the most, but because they're again using a lethal method, there are more deaths. And then non-fatal outcomes, as we have this conversation today, just for every minute that we're talking and having this conversation, 2 people are attempting their life in the United States. And I think that can be kind of hard to think about and really sad as we think about people feeling that alone and overwhelmed. So those are the statistics. We don't spend a lot of time on them because we want to jump into the skills. But bottom line, what I want you to know is when people are considering suicide, it's often when people are kind of feeling like a burden. They're feeling alone. They have overwhelming pain, and they just feel like they have to get out of this pain, and they can't think of any other way than to die by suicide. And that's why today I want to make sure that in your toolkit, your list of things that you can help people with, that you know that in that moment, if they're that overwhelmed, if that pain is so strong, they're not able to ask for help. That's why you and me have to ask them how they're doing and if they're thinking of suicide, because they can't think of anything in that moment. And so their ability to cope goes down, and then sort of all these other stressors are increasing. That's when someone might be considering suicide. A simpler way to explain it is that suicide isn't always about wanting to die, but it's about wanting to end overwhelming pain. So again, that pain is so much, I can't think of any way out of it to die. But for the people who've lived after an attempt over and over, they say, I didn't want to be gone forever. I didn't want to die. I just needed out of my pain. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do here today is I'm going to ask you to change the language. And you're going to see here today, we have a combo of some English slides. We have some slides that we have here in Spanish, because we do have a Spanish curriculum that's used in the schools. So sometimes you'll see the examples, because it might be for parents and those who are working in schools. So, but we felt like it's better to see as much Spanish as possible with the language here, and for everyone translating. But in general, we want to get away from saying the word committed. And so when we think of the word committed, it often comes with like a crime or a sin, or a lot of judgment is used with that language. And when we can make that language just be a descriptor, just describing what happened. Someone died by suicide, someone killed themselves. That is a description. But when we say committed, we don't say someone committed cancer, right? We want to be really gentle with that language. For those of you here on a call who've lost someone to suicide, for those of people who are struggling and not doing well, we want to be honoring. And so we want to describe what it is. We don't want to shy away from the language and pretend it's not there. Some people may not dare bring it up, but we want to say died by suicide. So here's your example that you see here on your slide here right now. And then we're going to move on here and jump into the model that we're teaching you here today. And on my next slide here, I have it in English and Spanish so that you can see it. In English, the word is learn, right? We're talking about learning a new skill. The learn steps is what we call it here at Forefront. Looking for signs, empathize and listen, ask about suicide, reduce the danger, and next steps. And so unfortunately, the acronym for you in Spanish doesn't exactly match. So I'm sorry about that. But we're looking at the learn. And there's a handout here too that if it wasn't sent to you before our training here today, it's in your packet. And we can send it separately as well afterwards when they send you the deck, and it will have the learn steps as well. Sometimes people find it helpful to hang it up in places of work. A lot of people in the construction industry, for example, they'll put it on walls or in the bathrooms. We have people in all sorts of industries that put it up in places where they're working. Schools have it everywhere too. So we're going to talk first here about looking for signs. I'm going to actually ask some audience participation here as we talk about looking for signs, and someone will translate for me. But I know in a group this size that you have heard and thought about warning signs before, maybe from someone near to you, maybe at the doctor or the therapist, maybe watching TV or a show. And I'm wondering if a few of you could put in the chat heard that are warning signs for someone who's thinking about suicide. And you can put them in Spanish too, and someone on the team will read them out to me so I can hear them. What might be a warning sign? Okay, deep depression. Thank you, Abigail. Continuous sadness, isolation, mood swings, giving away belongings. These are excellent. You guys know your stuff. Yes. These are all warning signs. You're all ready. People are feeling bad, maybe, yeah, or guilty for things, right? And despair, drinking more, yeah, their use of substances changes, absolutely. Yeah.
Hey,
You
Emmy,
guys are in tune.
we have a
I
couple here. Would you like me to read them to you?
I've been
Sleeping
reading.
a lot,
Yep, great,
loss of appetite.
great.
They stop doing things that they like doing.
Yes, yes.
Some of them, they start saying goodbye.
Mm. You guys have got this. You guys have got this. So I'm going to pull up the slide so you can see it here. Thank you so much, Anna, for reading those. And we usually put them in 3 categories. So as you shared them here today, and you guys are in tune, I can tell. You know your stuff. We usually have emotions and feelings. So some of the descriptors that you did were emotions and feelings, right? Some were actions and behaviors, like giving away things, maybe. When we think about sleep changing, right? Eating might change, different behaviors or change, and then experiences. So those are kind of the 3 categories that we have listed. And you're going to see here, you guys actually mentioned most of them. I don't even know if you need me here today. I think you can do this training next. I'm ready to train any of you to do this and take it to your communities. Promise. We've got scripts for you, so you just let us know. Emotional and physical pain, right, might be there too from people. But I think you've said all these ones. And then that mood swing can be surprising sometimes too, right? Because sometimes you and I watch our friends and we think, oh, look, they're so happy now. They look so happy. I'm so glad they're not depressed anymore. Phew. Okay, because that was so hard when they were not doing well. But they might have actually decided to end their life by suicide. So sometimes that quick mood swing, right, can actually mean that they've made a decision. So we have to watch out for that. For those of you working with youth or youth in your home, sometimes I experience it actually as anger and irritation. I think irritation is very high when someone is not doing well in those areas. You guys mentioned almost every single action and behavior that's on here. I think joking and threatening can be hard again, especially in schools or with younger youth. They do it often. So I encourage you to follow up always when that's said. What's not on here and sometimes asked about is also self-harm. So I just want to remind you that sometimes people do self-harm when they're trying to regulate how they feel inside, their emotions. And so if they have big feelings and they can't express them, sometimes they feel they can regulate by doing harm on themselves, maybe burning or cutting or doing something. And I just want you to know it doesn't mean that they're necessarily suicidal. It can just be a coping mechanism. So it tells you that someone's not doing well. It tells you that someone's maybe in distress and you should follow up on it, but it doesn't mean that they're necessarily suicidal that minute. And then experiences are here. And so that can be a recent loss of someone in their life, or maybe they have family members who've died by suicide, but a loss is often there before. It also can just be a loss of maybe a job, it can be a loss of employment. Sometimes when you think about like divorce, that can be like positive for one person to start life afresh, maybe away from something that hasn't been positive. But for other people, a divorce could be devastating, right? Emotionally, economically, with opportunities. So experiences can go push us more towards thinking suicide or away from it. When we think of discrimination that's linked to sexual orientation, gender identity, or race and ethnicity, it doesn't mean individuals, right? This is experiences. Just because you're a certain race, just because you have a certain identity, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily a higher risk in that moment, but it might mean that the experience you have from the community, right? Maybe that racism, maybe that discrimination that you experience every single day, that experience weighs on you and it increases your chances of maybe feeling suicidal or something. And then we know that personal or historical trauma. So we think about genocide, we think about slavery, we think of things over time that have happened to groups of people that really impact and that can also then be a warning sign. So that's L and what we look for warning signs. And you guys were great. You knew so many. We're going to head into the second step, which is actually empathy that you can see there. And we're going to start off by looking actually at a video. And Noemi is so great. She's going to play it for us. So we're going to leave this deck for a minute. Noemi is going to play it for you. It's from a professor in Texas named Brene Brown. And she's talking about the difference between empathy and sympathy. And empathy is the first thing we want to do when we think someone might be suicidal. Thank you so much, Noemi, for doing the technology on this. I could not do this without you. Here, do I need to stop sharing maybe?
¿Por qué
Here.
es tan diferente a la simpatía? La empatía te lleva a la conexión. La simpatía te empuja a la desconexión. Sobre la empatía nos habla Teresa Weissman, enfermera escolar que estudió profesiones muy diferentes entre sí, donde la empatía era relevante, y propuso 4 atributos a la misma. Tener perspectiva, la habilidad de tomar la perspectiva de otra persona o reconocerla como la verdad de esa persona. No emitir un juicio de valor, no es fácil con lo que disfrutamos haciéndolo. Reconocer las emociones en otras personas y luego comunicárselo. Empatía es ser sensible a otras personas. Siempre pienso en la empatía como una especie de lugar sagrado donde hay alguien en un agujero profundo y grita desde el fondo diciendo: «Estoy atrapada, está oscuro, estoy abrumada». Y de repente miramos hacia abajo y decimos: «¡Hey!» y descendemos. Sé lo que es estar aquí abajo y no estás sola. La simpatía es... ¡Qué mal!, ¿no? No. ¿Quieres un sándwich? La empatía es una elección, y es una elección que te hace vulnerable, porque para conectar contigo, tengo que conectar con algo en mí mismo que reconoce ese sentimiento. Rara vez se ocurre, una respuesta empática empieza con un «al menos». Sí, y lo hacemos todo el tiempo porque, ¿sabéis qué? Alguien compartió algo con nosotros que es increíblemente doloroso, e intentamos rodearlo con plata. No creo que exista esa expresión, pero yo la uso igualmente. Así que trazamos esa línea de plata alrededor y... Tuve un aborto espontáneo. Oh, al menos te puedes quedar preñada. Creo que mi matrimonio se está derrumbando. Al menos estás casada. A John quieren echarlo de la escuela. Al menos Sara es una estudiante de 10. Una de las cosas que hacemos a veces frente a conversaciones difíciles es tratar de mejorar las cosas. Si comparto algo contigo que es muy difícil, prefiero que me digas: «Realmente no sé qué decir, pero me alegra que me lo hayas contado». Porque la verdad es que es raro que una respuesta pueda hacernos sentir mejor. Pero lo que sí nos hace sentir mejor es la conexión. Gracias por ver.
It's a lovely video, isn't it? If you haven't seen it before, it's really, really great. So we enjoy it for sure. That's also a tool that you can use. So you can think about if you're trying to make sure and show someone or teach someone these skills, you can also do that. I'm going to go back here now and get our deck and get started. And then we'll jump right in again. All right. Thank you again, Noemi, for doing that. Let's get off. So now I'm going to give you a quiz. Are you ready? We'll see what you learned about empathy versus sympathy. Your friend tells you they're struggling. Which is the very best way to demonstrate empathy? 1, offer a solution to fix the problem. After all, you don't want to see them hurting. I know lots of us like to fix problems, huh? Share a story about a time that something similar happened to you, because that's easy to do, right? I want to tell the story because it was similar to yours. Number 3, sit with them and say, wow, that sounds like you're going through a lot right now. And 4, pull up a funny video and on your phone to help cheer them up. I know there's so many to choose from, right? So basically, which do you think is the very best? What's the one that's the very best showing empathy based on the video we had? How about some of you put that in the chat? 1, 2, 3, or 4. I'm seeing lots of 3s. I'm seeing lots of 3s. See, we know why you guys were chosen for this role, right? All these other areas are easy to do, but really, right, it's allowing someone to just be with them and say, wow, that sounds like you're going through a lot right now. Great job. See, nice job on the homework, the quiz. You didn't know you'd have to do that when you were here at the training today, right? So empathy, just to recap, it's trying to see the world as others see it. And you don't have to agree, right? You don't even have to fully know why it is that way, right? We have to understand how they're feeling in that moment. We want to be non-judgmental, validate another's feelings, and communicate that understanding. Sometimes we call that paraphrasing, where we're saying it back to them so they know that we heard them. And you see some examples there at the top. And if we had more time together, and if we got to hang out here a little bit today, I would hope that we could sit and share phrases that each of us use that might be good for empathy. The two that are here on this slide are, I'm so glad you told me, right? You just might say thank you to someone and say, I'm so glad you told me, because you may not know what else to say, right? Tell me more. I'm listening. Those are some great examples. And if you have other empathic statements, I'm going to move on to this next slide here, but you can put them in the chat if you have a statement that you think is really nice that shows empathy for the group that they maybe want to add to their toolkit so they have more statements. Feel free to put those in the chat and share with each other right now. Well, we're going to head into that section of the third part, learn, so LEA, and that's where we talk about asking, right? So saying the question, and often people feel worried about this part of the training, and I get it. These are hard conversations to have, even when you've had them many times. So we want to make sure that you prepare yourself a little bit. If you know you might ask a friend about this, you might think about where it could be private to do. You might want to practice these steps, look it up and be like, oh yeah, I saved that presentation once in my peer mentor program. I'm going to pull it up and look at them again. Maybe you're going to make sure that you know who you're going to refer them to and what would be available or who you would go with them as you refer. And also maybe you process it with someone here at Mental Health Matters or someone else that's going through this program with you so that you would have support if you're going to try this big conversation. So the way we're going to do this is you're going to ask them directly. What we know from research is when you are upfront, when you can say the word suicide, when you can talk about this with someone, people often actually are honest with you. I find that sometimes you maybe have to ask it twice in that same conversation. Maybe they don't open up that first time, but you follow up. But what happens is so powerful when you show up in someone's life as someone who can have these really difficult conversations, as someone who dares talk about things that most people don't talk about. People often will find you trusting and want to bring it up. Or maybe they're not suicidal, so they say no to you. But in a few months, they come back with a friend who's struggling, who's not doing well, or maybe suicidal to you because you have shown up in their life as someone who could do it. We want you to use direct language. So, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? If you use vague language like, oh, I hope you don't do something stupid. Well, what you think is stupid and what I think is stupid might be incredibly different. Or if some of you had trainings like this 20 years ago, you heard and were taught to say, are you thinking of harming yourself? But again, if we ask someone about harming themselves, that might be a little, but not taking their life. We need to know exactly what's happening so that we can help them get the best support for themselves that's available. That's why we want to ask these questions. Here's an example of exactly what you can say and do so that you can know what to say with someone. Again, we're going to practice this actually today in front of the computer in a minute. If you dare, if you're in a private place where you can think it. I know that when you say these things to someone you care about or know, your heart will be beating quickly. For me, my face turns red. I always feel like I have lots and lots of cotton in my mouth. Like, well, we want to practice these things so we can remember them, right? It's like good cooking. If you don't ever do it and then company comes and you just have to have this amazing meal, that's very hard. But if you're cooking and practicing and learning things, then you just make a meal that you often make, right? So we need that muscle memory. We need to practice things. This is how it sounds like. Sometimes when people are, and then that's where you put in those warning signs that we talked about earlier that you guys were so great on. They're thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? We use this framework because when we say sometimes when people are, we're telling them they're not the only ones in the whole world who've ever felt suicidal. Other humans have also felt this way and people in their community. So sometimes when people are, by adding the warning signs, you're letting them know that you're watching their life. You're walking alongside them and you're worried for not just out of the blue, you chose something, but because you're worried for them because of the things you've seen. And then again, here we have asking directly, right? We want people to know that you're asking directly. We have an example here for you, and it might be different than the one I read. And when you have a chance to practice this next, you can choose any warning signs you want, or you can think about someone in your life. But this is how it sounds like. Sometimes when people are feeling depressed and isolated and are also going through a major life change, they're thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? Sometimes when people are no longer enjoying the things they used to do before, you used to play soccer and now you're injured and you aren't playing anymore. You don't want to go to school or be with any of your friends. They might be thinking about suicide. Are you thinking of suicide? Sometimes when people lose their job and no longer can provide for their family in the way they used to do it before, they're having trouble sleeping and probably drinking too much, they're thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? So those are some examples I gave you. And what I'm going to have you do next, you can all just stay muted. If you're somewhere private right now, I want you to read this once or twice. You can either think of your own warning signs that we mentioned, or you can choose some that are listed here. Again, this is from our school program, so they might resonate more with youth, but which ones are there, and put here into the statement. And if you're in a car with lots of people or your children nearby and don't dare, that's okay. Then just think it. But otherwise, I want every one of you to try this 1 or 2 times right now so that when we leave our training today, you've had a chance to try this. So I'm going to be silent for about 20, 30 seconds while you get a chance to give it a try. All right, I saw lots of mouths moving and people intently looking at the slide. I'm wondering in our chat here today if you have the opportunity, how did it feel to say these words? How did it feel to say the word suicide? And how did it feel to ask this question? Let's put some responses here in the chat. Anyone else have a feeling how it felt? It's weird. It's a sad question. Yeah, it's hard for us to ask. It was hard. I'm glad I asked someone because we were able to talk, since we're not used to doing it. I bet it's not so easy when the person's in front of you. It's still hard. Yeah. Ana, will you read a few that are in Spanish for us too?
Yes. So they said it's not easy. It's hard to say the word suicide. Do you want to inflict damage on yourself or hurt yourself? Let's see. It hurts because of family history, but you have to say it directly. Yeah. It feels weird. Okay. Without knowledge or preparation, it's even more hard to do. It's hard to keeps moving. It's hard to make to get those questions and ask them about suicide. You feel fear when before you listen to the answer.
Yeah, so that's where we're going to head next. But I see lots of more statements. Thank you for translating many of them. I hope you see, as you see everyone responding here together, that you are not alone with these feelings, right? You probably read many people's statements that felt very much like your own story. And I love what some of you said that, oh, the first time was harder. It was a little bit easier when I said it the second or third time. And that's true. And I just want to resonate with that fear that often when we ask people this question, sometimes they're glad you asked. Sometimes they open up right away, right? I mentioned that often in my conversation, I do it towards, you've had empathy, you've connected towards the beginning, but then in the end, right, I have to keep going. We talk, I do empathy more, and then I ask again. And sometimes people are really angry at you. So you have to kind of be willing to know that someone might be very, very angry for bringing this up, and you might still save their life, or a really good conversation might come from it. And so know that Sometimes it's not well received, and yet you're still coming across as a safe person who cares about them. You would not have asked if there were not some warning signs. And so, yeah, those are things that you guys are going to want to talk a little bit more about too, right, as you think about it. But thank you so much for trying. And thank you also for sharing with each other how that felt. Because it takes a lot of courage for those of you who've done it, and also for just even today as we talk about it. So there's fear as we're wondering what they're going to answer. So what if they say no? Well, whatever we want to do, we don't want, oh no, when do I ask? Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. I need to make sure because I can't read my Spanish. When do I ask? Okay, if you see multiple signs, if there's big changes in their behavior, and then when your gut tells you to. So don't underestimate your gut telling you, oh, I should definitely be doing this, okay? Make sure that if you think something's there, you could talk to someone about mental health matters or a friend or someone in this group. But when in doubt, we just want to make sure you ask. Well, what if they say no? The first thing we want to make sure is that you're not relieved. I know you want them to say no because you're like, I'm stressed and I don't know what to do. But we don't want to be like, phew, okay, great. I was so worried you were going to say yes, right? Because they might be feeling suicidal. They might have just not told you the truth, right? Or we want to make sure they know that you can have these big conversations. So you're going to stay neutral, you're going to stay non-judgmental, you're going to help your heart calm down and not be so stressed. You're going to let them know that you care. And then if you're still concerned and they say no, you're still going to gather more information. And you see that there with kind of that colored question. And this is a really great question to also have in your toolkit, even about other topics. But if you were thinking about suicide, who would you talk to? So even if you're talking to them about something else with mental health, and if you're like, if you were worried about XYZ, who would you talk to? That is already, right, an intervention. That's already making sure if you are not the safe people in their life, but they say, I'll talk to the school counselor, I talk to the daughter, I would talk to my grandparent, I would talk to someone. If there's someone in their community or a mentor, maybe there's someone else they could talk to. And then you'd move on to the R and the N steps. And then if they say yes, we want to make sure that, again, you stay neutral, non-judgmental, that you take it seriously. You thank them for their honesty, you acknowledge the pain that they're in, and then you move on to the R and the N steps. And this is going to really depend and be different, your role, whether you are like a family member, whether you are a parent to somebody. If you're a coworker, it looks different, right? Because then maybe you involve a manager and ask if there's like an EAP program or something, or if it's in the community, is there someone in the community that can help? But again, depending on how close we are to the person, we have more ability to ask. The last step here before we watch our video, I just want to make sure that you know this is reducing the danger. And again, the danger part also depends on your relationship because people we live with, we can do more things with. And again, if there are many more people removed, maybe we can't. But you're trying to figure out who can help. And I want to make sure too, when we think about your role with the person being suicidal, the number one thing there is to not leave them alone. So we want to make sure we never leave the person alone if they said yes to us and are suicidal. But here, when we say in this setting with your role in removing things, you want to figure out who can help. Because if you live in the house with this person, you can do lots of these things. But again, otherwise it might be a family member for them or a friend or someone they trust, or maybe it's someone in their faith community. You want to make sure you still show you care. And then again, I'm just going to invite you to make sure that you're removing things in your home right now. We all choose to wear life jackets, that too. But when I think of seatbelts, there was once a time where people did not wear seatbelts. They said, well, I'm not going to get in an accident. Well, you don't know. You wear a seatbelt in case you're in an accident. In my house, my medication is locked up, for example, right? Because I don't know who's going to be here, who's going to be in crisis or things. And so most of mine is locked up. And so here we talk about some of the questions that we want you to ask, and then we'll talk about what you can do in your own home. These are questions you ask, and the reason you ask them is because you need to know who you're going to get help with. So you might ask, have you thought about how you might end your life? Do you have access to those methods? And have you thought about when you might do this? And so those are important questions because we don't know if we need to call 911 right now. So if someone has a gun in their backpack and it's loaded and they say, I'm going to do it now we need 911. Many times there's lots of people who do not feel safe with 911. So if it's not imminent danger, like this minute, we have time and we can call 988. Maybe we can get community resources. Maybe we can get other people involved. But if they have thought about suicide, but they have no idea how they're going to end their life, you have more time. right? You have more space to figure this out and get people involved. If they have no idea how they're going to do it, again, it means it's a better situation than if they said, yes, when I leave my job today, I'm going to go home and I'm going to do this. Now we need to get someone involved right now. So this is the information you're trying to get to help. And then the goal is to put time and distance between the suicidal person and the methods that they might use. And so there's just lots of research that there's a small window. A lot of research says it's as short as 10 minutes for people when they're thinking and having that urge to end their life. In those 10 minutes, if they cannot access what they were going to use, then we bought time. Now they maybe can see and talk to someone else. Now maybe they have other problem solving skills. Maybe there's someone in their life who could help them, or they're tired and they just go to sleep or something. So you're getting these questions so you know how they're doing. And the goal is to put time and distance between that person in distress. And so that's why when we look at things we can do, we really want firearms locked up. You saw in the groups of people who died the most by suicide, it's because they use firearms, right? Hard to save someone if they've used a gun. So many people have guns in their homes. It's used for hobbies. It might be used for hunting. It might be used for their job or recreational. We just want to make sure that they're locked up. I work with several people who work here at Safer Homes at the bottom that you can look up with, and they're all in the military and they work at gun ranges and they teach it. They've been snipers. So in our organization, we have people who use guns all the time, and they go out in the community and they give out lock boxes so that the guns can be locked up, or they give out kits for medicine so that you can get rid of medicine you don't need in your home. So again, what can you do so that if you don't know who's at home or how upset people are, they cannot access things that would kill them, right? So today we want to lock up firearms, prescription medication, over-the-counter medication. Don't just think it's prescription. All it takes is like 30 Tylenol, right? Like it's just a bottle of meds. So prescription, don't buy the Costco size, even though it's cheaper. Don't have huge amounts available to kids or youth or people if someone's not doing well. We want to make sure that it's not available if people are not doing well. And then in a crisis, I hope there's someone helping. I hope there's a doctor helping, or a psychologist, or someone from a community a location that can be helping, or a school. Then sometimes you might have to lock up things like alcohol or drugs or belts or ropes or plastic bags or all those things on their knives. But in general, that's when someone's in crisis. And I hope you have help by your side, or you're calling 988 to get help on what I should lock up. I am looking at our resource slide that, oh, here we go. And we've got a little, here our next step to take. This order got a little bit in a wrong order here for a minute here, but we'll do what to make sure to not leave the person alone. I mentioned that before. We want to make sure and connect them to resources. So that might be calling a lifeline, that might be calling 988 or someone. We want to make sure that we have others that can help you in that situation. Maybe we can remove the danger. If it's someone who's close to them and their family or home or work, we can make sure it's removed. And then you want to continue to check in, even if it's something as small as a text message. But just continue to remember here, stay with that person, and then always make sure to think about what are the resources that I can connect them to no matter what my relationship is with them. We're going to look here at the resources that are available to you. I hope that you're pulling your phone out right now and that you're putting 988 in it if you don't have it already. 988 came out 2 summers ago, and that can be used for mental health issues. And so the people who answer are not, they can get 911 involved as well if it's danger right now, but otherwise they'll help connect you to resources. And I want to make sure that you know that if you press number 2, that they'll ask if you want Spanish help, and that also works with the texting line or the phone line. A lot of times youth only want to do text together. But again, you can try this out. I would love to give you all homework today so that all of you, maybe not on a busy Friday or Saturday night, but you can text them and try it out and say, I'm trying this out for a role that I'm in. All of our staff has tried it out. I said, I want to try this out, how it would be if I was helping a parent who had a suicidal kid. What would you have me do and go through those steps? So you could say, I want to know how it feels to do this in Spanish, so I can refer the 988 line. And I want to know how it would feel if I called in and I wasn't doing well. You can text, you can do phone calls. The crisis text line is on there, the Trans Lifeline and Trevor Project. Here's a packet of information you can download here as well if you want to otherwise. And I'm sure you guys get lots of amazing resources from Mental Health Washington as well. What we're going to do next is we're going to watch that video and unpack it together, and then I'll take questions as we talk here and end our time together. This video you'll be able to have and hear, you'll be able to read with the Spanish subtitles. And I just want you to know that this is just a role modeling of it. This is a coworker of mine named Marnie, so it's a real story. It is her real journey. And then this is a coworker of hers asking. And so again, as in all these videos, they're not always perfect or not. There might be parts where you're like, that would never work for me, or that would never be the way it could be, or I don't know if that can really happen that way. So just remember, our goal today is to just see the steps in action, to see how it fits within a regular conversation in a relationship. And then you could be thinking about too what you might be doing different or not, depending on your relationship with the person. But in this video, David and Marnie are close. And so you'll see him be pretty serious about what he wants to do because she's at risk. And again, thank you to Marnie for being a part of this. She shares her own story, so it can feel a little overwhelming, but we'll give it a start and you'll hear it.
Hi, come on in.
Hi, Marnie. How are you?
I'm okay.
It's very good to see you. I'm sorry to show up unannounced.
Oh, you're fine. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Can I get you some coffee?
Coffee sounds very good. Thank you. I sent you a couple Facebook messages and made a couple phone calls to you. Didn't hear back from you. I just wanted to check in with you and see how everything's going.
Well, you know me.
Thank you.
I don't do Facebook, and I just have a lot going on. I'm fine. Do you want to have a seat?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Marnie, I heard last week at work in your team meeting you had a bit of a meltdown.
Yeah, well,
Marnie, would you come have a seat with me?
sure.
Marnie, how are you?
You know, sometimes I just have so much pain still. I feel so terrible that as Sam's mom, I didn't know enough to keep him alive.
It sounds like you're in a lot of pain. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, I mean, he struggled with depression, and I remember telling him he was going to grow out of it. I just feel, you know, all the things I could have done and I didn't do to help him.
How are you sleeping?
I have this sort of half sleep in which I just play memories, you know, half the night.
Right. You know, Marnie, sometimes when people aren't sleeping well, are having meltdowns at work, are missing weekend events with friends, and are suicide loss survivors themselves, they're thinking about suicide. Marnie, are you thinking about suicide?
David, sometimes I do. He was my only child.
Right. Thank you for your honest response. Have you thought about how you might take your own life?
I have all of Sam's meds still.
And those meds are here in the house?
Upstairs.
How about we go upstairs and get those medications rounded up?
you know, I don't really want to let go of them, honestly.
Okay. Nor do I want to take them, but how about I just hold them for now?
Well, it's not like I'm going to take them today.
Marnie, I'm not leaving this house today without those medications.
Okay.
Okay. And how about you? Let's get you some help. I'm calling the Suicide Lifeline. I'm putting us on speakerphone.
You have reached the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, also serving the Veterans Crisis Line.
So that gives you a little bit of a sense of how that conversation can go. Again, I know for those of you who've been impacted personally by suicide, it can be hard to watch. And especially in this setting, we know that it's a real story. And so we do this work, right, to honor Sam, Marnie's son, too. I'm going to just have some questions come down here, and I'll choose a few of them for us just based on time so we can do overall questions next. But I am wondering if anyone can just say a little bit what warning signs that you saw. Are there a few that you can put in the chat, a few of you? What warning signs you saw? Yes, so that crisis line is the same one as 988, but this video was made before 988 happened, just to clarify. Yeah, crisis at work, sadness, meltdown. Yeah, these are all great. And obviously you guys can see that she's a suicide survivor. So she is in grief and loss, having just lost her son. And we know that's a warning sign as well. Great work. We saw David give empathy. He stood by her. There was times it was appropriate for him to touch her. He used a soft voice, right? He was right eye to eye with her. Lots of different ways we see there him using empathy skills. And then you saw him use the question, right? How did he ask directly about suicide, right? He used exactly what we practiced early on, right? He added those warning signs that he had seen. He was direct. He was specific with her, right? He followed up with those follow-up questions that you see. He asked like if she had thought about it, what she would use, when she would use. In her case, she was very clear what she would do, right? So she was trying to blow it off by like, well, I'm not doing it now, but he knew if he left that house, I mean, at work. For a lot of you here today, I know it might feel like he was so strong in how he said, I am not leaving this house without them. So I know that sometimes that can kind of trigger things for people, but obviously they had a close enough relationship and he was worried enough about her that that's truly how he felt, that he was going to kind of really dig in with her about it. And I don't know if we had more time here, we could talk too, but I don't know if your eyes had seen as the camera scanned as this video started, but I don't know if you saw all those bottles of medication on the windowsill as he came in also. So he was also watching for those warning signs as he came in, besides asking her. So he also could have seen all those bottles of medications and then knowing there's ones upstairs. And so he was being very firm about it. And again, that's going to depend on your role within your community and who these people are and how you know them. And what if they're resistant to receiving help? Clearly, I'm seeing that. Absolutely. Yeah, it's hard when they're resistant. That's why you saw in that case what would happen. And that's where sometimes you have to call in help with other people and just say, I know you're going to be mad at me, but I am so worried about your safety. I was helping a situation a while back where, for example, it involved a car, removing the car keys for someone you might have to do just in that crisis moment. That's why you need to know, who could I call? Who could come? If she wouldn't give the meds, then who does that like Marnie trust so that she could call someone in? Who's a resource in your community? Or can you call 988 and say, I don't know what to do. I'm with a friend. They won't give me their meds. I'm sitting here in their house. I don't want to leave. I'm worried they're going to take them. What do I do? So you can always call yourself as well. And then next steps you saw that were taken there as well. So there you go. And then let's head on here. And I can make sure we put little statements there later, how it felt seeing it all in action too. But I'll get you going on your survey here at the end and other questions, but just making sure that you know, we talked about it being a public health issue, why people consider suicide, supporting someone might be at risk. I hope you have more clarity on like what specific tasks and skills you might use in that moment. And then using that learned scenario, we watched it happen together there a little bit. So sorry, I'm rushing here a bit, but making sure that you know how to reach out to someone in distress, say died by suicide. Did you add a number in your phone now? And then what can you do today? Maybe you have medication at your house that are from surgery someone did 20 years ago, medication that wasn't used. How can you take that back to a pharmacy or a fire station with it? There's places you can take it back and get rid of it. If you have a gun at home, how can you make sure that it's locked? What are ways that we can make sure that those around coming through our house, even just not having large amounts of medication and maybe buying the kind that come in packages of 2. While I'm finishing up here, I just want you to know the post survey is here. If you're willing to bring that up on your computer or on your phone, you can do it as well and be filling it out. Again, it's really important for us to get this information that we have. Thank you to Anna for putting that link also in the chat. And maybe also that packet from the beginning, again, with all those resources can go in while we're finishing up here as well. And then I'll stay on here for a few minutes. I know we're tight on time, but we have a few minutes, maybe a question or two if it's burning and you're really wanting to talk about it. And I'll have someone translate for me here. And I can answer 1 or 2 questions before you finish your time here today. But I want to remind you, thank you again. Please fill out this survey as we're finishing out here today. And then be gentle with yourself. Reach out to someone else in the program, someone here at Mental Health Matters, try 988 otherwise. But if you're struggling tonight after this conversation, maybe it's something you can talk about with a friend or a family and process what you learned today even. That really helps us all sort through it. A walk, a meal, maybe you're watching the Super Bowl. What can you do to kind of deregulate after this intense conversation? But again, you're saving lives with the work that you're doing through Mental Health Matters. And it's so powerful as someone who's with you here in Washington State to know how much you care about your community that you're joining me in these conversations. So I'm inspired to be here with you all today. Okay, are there any questions you're wanting to ask at this moment before I hand it back over?
¿Alguna pregunta que haya? Ella tiene que retirarse, pero podemos hacer unas 2 preguntas quizás. Y bueno, en lo que piensan en alguna pregunta, we want to thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. You inspire us as well. You are such an amazing person and presenter. So,
I love partnering with you guys.
Thank you. Abigail, yeah, go ahead. Abigail.
Sí, a mí lo que me gustaría saber es después de este entrenamiento y hacemos todos los pasos que ella recomienda y por alguna razón no tenemos éxito y esa persona pues al final sí se suicida, ¿cómo podemos nosotros como acompañantes vivir con eso? ¿Cómo lo manejamos? Eso es lo que me preocupa. Gracias.
Muy bien. Abigail is asking, after doing this training or more trainings, even if they try to stop the person, what happens? How they can help themselves after if someone still do it and die for suicide, even if they try to stop it?
So after how we handle it, even though someone we know dies by suicide, yeah, it's very hard, right? And that's very complicated grief. Sometimes we talk about grief in the field as being complicated because there's so many layers and it's hard to know someone that you maybe tried to stop or you maybe saw no warning signs. Sometimes there's no warning signs, right? And they died by suicide. So we want to make sure if you can find a professional in your community to work on and feel supported by grief, your friends, your family, you might want to read about it. There's lots of resources, but often we really want to make sure that we have people that are really helping us in that moment. We have a training we do 4 times a year, and I can make sure that we get that information to everyone here so that if you guys wanted to run one of those programs once, Charlene, my coworker, it's 1 hour and it's a training and it's about grief after suicide. And maybe that's something we partner on and have a translation for once a year, and we could offer it with Spanish So let's talk about that. We haven't thought about that before. We just offer English. So
Oh,
that would
yes.
be really great. Yes. Okay. Let's see if we could offer it in Spanish
Okay,
and you
one
guys
more.
could have it or the recording. I'll
Thank
email
you
you
so
about it.
much, Amy,
Yes.
for that. One more question. If there is someone have
And
a
then I'll
question.
pass it on. Yeah.
No one? Okay.
Noemí,
Okay. Ujú.
se escucha,
Sí,
disculpa.
Berta, te escuchamos.
Buenas tardes, Noemí. Pues muy agradecida con Amy. Qué buena información. Yo solo quiero agradecerle a todo el grupo porque qué difícil es acercarse a una persona pues que quiere el suicidio, con qué palabras podemos ayudar aparte de la empatía, que yo veo a veces mucha frialdad entre las personas, ¿verdad? Entonces, eso es lo que quiero comentar nada más, que cómo ha servido este curso para eso, ¿verdad? Y sobre todo la lección de hoy, que uno piensa que entre las personas, cercanas, la familia, no puede ocurrir, pero pues claro que puede darse el caso, porque no, entonces esto nos ayuda, la verdad, nos ayuda mucho y quiero agradecerte, Noemí, Ana, a todo el equipo, a esta señora Amy también. Muchas gracias, Noemí.
So Berta only wanna say thank you for doing this for us, and she
Thank you,
was
Berta.
inspired for your work and all the training today. Basically.
Thank you so much. I know these are hard conversations and they're hard to have. And we have to think about especially what we do to bring mental health right to the forefront in our communities. They don't always want to talk about it. So we have to be the courage ones, carrying the courage. Thank you all so much. And again, this is work that we do. We would love to have people who speak Spanish alongside us if anyone's interested in finding out ways to help with these kind of trainings and conversations, reach out to me. But thank you all so incredibly
Thank you
much.
so much, Amy. Thank you.
We
Have a nice day.
love Mental Health Matters, favorite organization of all time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. See you next time. Ok, pues bueno, muchas gracias por esto. Espero que hayan disfrutado dentro de lo que se puede disfrutar el conocimiento, ¿verdad? Es un tema difícil, como vimos, pero bueno, tenemos que hablar de esto porque es parte, pues, de cómo podemos precisamente combatir el estigma, ¿verdad? Lo que hemos venido hablando otras sesiones. Y bueno, ahorita vamos a tener, yo sé que a lo mejor el tema es bastante apasionante, interesante, y vamos a ofrecerles un entrenamiento posterior dentro de una mesa redonda que vamos a tener el 1 de mayo. Vamos a tener a Forefront y a su equipo hablando va a ser un entrenamiento más, porque ellos tienen entrenamientos que son bastante amplios, entonces ahora sí que lo compactó en 1 hora, pero son entrenamientos que, como ustedes a lo mejor quedaron con muchas preguntas, qué hacer, qué decir, cómo voy, a dónde voy. Entonces va a haber un entrenamiento que vamos a ofrecer, les vamos a pasar información por si están ustedes interesados en esta información. Y bueno, quiero agradecerles de la Padlet. Estuve leyendo la Padlet y la verdad, muy interesantes las reflexiones, lo que nos compartió. Y yo les compartí aquí un poco de mi historia, ¿verdad? Yo tengo a alguien que murió por suicidio en mi familia y fue impactante, por eso es que, pues yo quizás esto fue lo que cambió mi vida, mi rumbo, pero el día de hoy, pues la verdad me siento bastante agradecida porque pues puedo hablar de eso, puedo hablarlo, puedo reflexionarlo, pero sobre todo puedo saber que, bueno, podemos ser el cambio, la respuesta para alguien, ¿verdad? Entonces les agradezco mucho que realmente estén involucrados en este trabajo porque es maravilloso. Y bueno, también vamos a, antes de ver el video, no sé si haya preguntas, tenemos a Socorro, ¿verdad? Que tiene también ella, obviamente, la capacidad de comentarnos, de respondernos preguntas. Alguien que tenga alguna pregunta que quiera compartir o que quiera resolver, y tenemos, les decía, a Socorro. Entonces, ¿alguien? Antes de... Sí, a ver, muchas gracias, Magdalena. Cándida, adelante.
Sí, yo me quedé con una duda. Buenas tardes, porque
Sí.
yo nunca he tenido una situación así, pero me preguntaba yo, ¿qué pasa cuando una persona pasa de estar muy relajada escuchando a la amiga, o, ¿verdad? Y la persona que tiene los problemas de repente se vuelve agresiva al escuchar que la amiga le sugiere, ¿verdad?, que busque ayuda y empieza a gritar, a ponerse agresiva. Entiendo que es mejor irse, ¿verdad? Pero aún así, ¿qué debería uno de hacer? Porque si estás viendo cómo está la persona, es muy probable que cometa alguna de estas cosas, ¿verdad? Entonces, ahí, ¿qué puedes hacer?
Muy bien, gracias.
Me pregunto si Socorro puede también mencionar si tiene conocimiento con respecto a si eso es algo común, porque en mi experiencia típicamente la persona que está deprimida usualmente no está expresando sentimientos de violencia, y me pregunto si nuestra profesional puede poner un poquito de luz con respecto a esa. Hay otras situaciones dentro de la salud mental donde es más posible personas que están usando drogas o con alcohol, pero no sé si Socorro nos puede hablar un poquito de eso.
Sí, gracias, Sandra. Estoy de acuerdo con Sandra. Por lo regular, las personas que están sufriendo de trastornos mentales o que tienen la depresión o ansiedad, por lo regular no son personas alteradas, que se puedan volver como violentas. Pero la pregunta que hace Berta acerca de que si la persona reacciona de esa manera, pues porque todo es posible, ¿verdad? Lo mejor hacer en esas situaciones sería uno mantener la calma, ¿verdad? Porque sabemos que la persona por lo regular solamente se va a alterar más si uno se altera igual y trata como de restringirlos o algo. Pero si uno se calma y les sigue hablando con voz calmada, voz suave, como estaba haciendo el señor en el video, mostrando esa empatía de que en verdad quiere ayudar a la persona y que está preocupado por ellos, es probable que esa persona, ellos mismos se empiezan a calmar igual si ven que no están agarrando una reacción de confrontamiento con usted. ¿Contesté su pregunta, Berta?
Ok. Tenemos otra de
Bueno,
Rosa. Dice,
no,
¿cuáles
no,
herramientas? Ok.
perdón,
No, Cándida, era Cándida, ¿verdad?
La
sí.
candidata, perdón.
Sí, bueno, yo, como le digo, yo no tuve experiencia, pero sí conozco personas que tienen estas experiencias y sí, efectivamente, este muchacho usaba drogas y pues la mamá alguna vez se resultó golpeada a ella sin decir nada, ¿verdad? Entonces yo me estaba acordando de ella precisamente, o sea, yo lo único que le dije a ella, sal de la casa, no te quedes ahí, porque no sabes si él te puede hacer algo, ¿verdad? Entonces sí me gustaría yo saber, porque yo nunca he tenido una de esas, pero yo creo que ha de ser raro los casos, ¿verdad? Que han de suceder, pero sí me interesaría para estar preparado uno en
Es
caso.
un poco de lo que hablábamos la semana pasada, ¿se acuerdan de cómo ayudar a alguien que estaba en una crisis? Y incluso Socorro lo decía, ¿verdad? A veces uno tiene que distinguir cuándo se pone en peligro, cuándo hay que pedir ayuda, ¿verdad? Externa, y cuándo hay que, pues, de alguna manera, pues, discernir, ¿verdad? De cuando ya es una agresividad bajo como lo decía Sandra, bajo alguna, influencia de algún tipo de sustancia, ¿verdad? Entonces, ahí son casos especiales, pero sí, definitivamente, pues, crearnos herramientas, ¿verdad? Y luego tenemos, ¿cuáles herramientas son recomendadas para situaciones donde la persona tiene sus disparadores por los recuerdos almacenados inconscientemente, ¿verdad? Y
No sé si
tenemos ahí a
entiendo,
Socorro.
no sé si entiendo muy bien esa pregunta, Rosa.
Ok, Rosa, ¿nos puedes clarificar un poco?
Sí, solo estaba pensando en algo que me pasó personalmente. Y creo que lo comenté en la ballet. Afortunadamente, mi padre nunca logró tomar su vida por propia mano, pero yo era una niña y no sabía hasta qué instinto me iba. No entendía hasta que ahora como adulta tomé el entrenamiento de suicidio para facilitarlo
Ujú.
y no lo pude hacer, porque memorias se vinieron a mí y no lo logré. ¿Qué herramientas puedo utilizar para como, alejarme de eso?
de lo que te provocó a ti, ¿verdad? Lo que te dejó este duelo, por decirlo así. Ok. Era un poco de lo que hablaba Amy, ¿verdad? De que hay una manera de vivir el duelo. Pero bueno, Socorro, ¿quedó un poquito más claro?
Sí, gracias por aclararlo, Rosa. Y lo que me suena es de que quizás en este caso, si uno mismo está lidiando con una experiencia del pasado que le causa una reacción de una emoción alterada, es un trigger como puso Rosa, que básicamente es algo que altera nuevamente al sistema nervioso, recordando a un evento del pasado por haber sido doloroso. Muchas veces en esos casos, pues uno mismo tiene que hacer su propio trabajo antes de poder ayudar a alguien. Y pues la pregunta es, ¿cómo hace uno el trabajo? Parte sería procesando ese evento doloroso en su vida con un profesional. Sería la mejor manera que uno pueda hacerlo, y si uno no piensa que eso es lo que quiere hacer, puede también encontrar maneras de cómo apoyarse en otras personas, uno mismo también, porque recuerden que ustedes están ofreciendo ayudas, pero también tienen que cuidarse a ustedes mismos, ¿verdad? So, es de conectarse con su religión, su espiritualidad, con otras personas, procesar cómo les está impactando a ustedes, cuidándose a ustedes mismos. No puedo decir específicamente, pero lo que usted está compartiendo, Rosa, me parece que quizás le ayudaría a hablar con un profesional sobre este evento que usted pasó por en su niñez, que no fue nada fácil.
Ok, gracias, Socorro. Vamos con una pregunta de Noemí y la de Camila para seguir, para concluir, porque ya estamos en tiempo, ¿ok? Dice, se me perdió, aquí, Noemí. ¿Qué podemos hacer si la persona se niega todas las veces que le preguntamos y se aísla más?
Si le preguntan sobre si se están
Yo creo que
tratando de quitar.
les necesitan ayuda.
Ok. Am, Bueno, si pensamos que no están en peligro de hacerse daño, no están en una crisis, entonces la recomendación es de que es bueno darles ese espacio a la persona, porque sí sabemos que si empujamos a ciertas ideas a una persona de lo que deberían de hacer, si ellos mismos se sienten forzados, pues naturalmente eso va a ser como una respuesta de alejarse. So, depende de cómo uno mismo les está preguntando también. Si uno les está preguntando cada día, cada hora, te estás pensando en matar, pues me imagino que la persona se va a querer retirar, pero si uno le está preguntando de vez en cuando como manera de ver cómo están, quizás no vaya a tener esa reacción.
Okay. Y cerramos con Camila esta sección de preguntas.
Gracias, Noemi. Oye, la pregunta, Socorro, regresándome un poquito a lo que Cándida preguntó, porque, por ejemplo, a mí no me queda claro qué voy a hacer el día de que, por ejemplo, alguien se acerque y me diga, mi hijo está muy agresivo por el ejemplo que pusieron de drogas. ¿Cuál es la herramienta? ¿Llamar al 911 o hay una línea especial donde uno puede decir, sabes qué, llama a este lugar para que vengan y atiendan la situación que se tornó agresiva? Porque decía Cándida, le comentó a la señora, pues salte de tu casa, pues no, el problema es la persona que tiene el conflicto con este caso con drogas o alcohol. No es que se salga la persona, la mamá en este caso que puso el ejemplo Cándida. Entonces, ¿cuál es la herramienta que uno puede optar en esos casos? ¿A dónde se debe uno llamar o qué debe uno de sugerir?
So, vamos a lo que puso esta Amy en su presentación. So, el 911 es como para cuando uno está en peligro inmediato, ¿verdad? Tienen esa intención de quitarse la vida, tienen la manera de cómo hacerlo y están haciendo un peligro para sí mismo y para otras personas. Si uno es, si uno es capaz de salir del hogar, esa no es una mala idea. Uno mismo tiene que mantenerse seguro también. Y al salirse de la casa, uno también puede después llamar a la línea de crisis, que sería el 988. So, la línea de crisis es bueno para utilizar en ese ejemplo que se está presentando. Camila, sí es que el 911 es un número que causa como cierta reacción también, porque sabemos que las minoridades muchas veces no tienen una conexión segura o positiva con la policía, y quizás ese no sería el mejor número que llamar, pero el 98 8 es un número que uno puede utilizar en cualquier momento y pueden preguntarles a ellos mismos, ok, yo estoy en esa situación, ¿qué me sugieren que haga en este momento, verdad? Eso es lo que estaba platicando a Amy también en su presentación y que uno lo puede hacer en cualquier momento y si la persona se niega de la ayuda, uno todavía puede llamarlo como en su propia casa para agarrar sugerencias de cómo ayudar a esa persona que se niega a la ayuda.
Ah, ok,
Gracias,
excelente.
Socorro.
Muchas gracias,
Hay
Socorro.
dos puntos diferentes acá. Uno es la atención a una persona en peligro de suicidio y la otra pregunta completamente diferente es qué hacemos si una persona, ya sea familiar o visita o amigo, está actuando irracionalmente por el uso o el abuso de las drogas. Así que solamente quería aclarar que es importante saber que esas son dos respuestas que Socorro nos está dando, dos puntos de vista que son separados. Y ella ya lo dijo bien claro que si hay peligro de hacerse daño a sí mismo, a la persona, ya eso estamos hablando del 911. Si queremos saber cómo ayudar a una persona, eso es el 988. Y para nuestras comunidades, cuando hay muchos que somos indocumentados o que tenemos tickets o que tantas cosas, hay que pensar bien antes de llamar al 911 y asegurarnos que lo que necesitamos se puede obtener a través del 911 y no aumentar y complicar muchas más las cosas que desafortunadamente nuestra comunidad tiene que pensar antes de llamar.
Ok, muchas gracias, Sandra, por esa aportación que es valiosa. Y bueno, quiero también agradecer, tomar la oportunidad para agradecer a nuestras traductoras del día de hoy, Stacy y Carla, muchísimas gracias, que hicieron posible que pudiéramos tener esta traducción simultánea bastante buena y oportuna. Muchísimas gracias por apoyarnos el día de hoy y espero que hayan tenido una buena experiencia también. Y bueno, nos quedó pendiente un video, nos quedó pendiente varias cosas, pero bueno, lo único que quiero es también, ya saliéndonos un poquito del tema, pensar ya en nuestra celebración de graduación que ya se acerca. Tenemos esta fecha que hemos creado el marzo 3, que es un domingo, que sería básicamente como si fuera una sesión, pero esta va a ser en vivo, ¿verdad? Podemos ver en vivo. Estamos planeando realizarla en la librería de Edmonds, en la biblioteca de Edmonds, que es pública, ¿verdad? Y que está, bueno, ahí pueden ver la dirección, quizás muchas estén familiarizadas. Por eso es bien importante que pues, nos apuremos, ¿verdad? Con esas lecciones para que el día 3 pues quien quiera llegar ahí con nosotras va a poder coger su certificado, puede conocer a otros navegadores, ¿verdad? Hacer conexiones. O sea, a veces es maravilloso las conexiones y los equipos de trabajo que pueden salir de aquí. Y además, pues vamos a ofrecer un postrecito, un cupcake por ahí y pues podemos tomarnos la foto y celebrar este gran acontecimiento, ¿verdad? Que es bastante para llevarlo así. Entonces, ténganlo en cuenta que nuestra celebración va a ser ese día y pues lo importante es que pues para que puedan tener su certificado, pues recuerden que hay que completar las lecciones. Por ahí recibimos unos emails de algunas problemáticas, al parecer ya Ana trabajó en ellas, entonces si alguien sigue teniendo alguna dificultad, no deje de contactarse con nosotros. Recuerden, aquí está nuestro contacto, recuerden que ahí nos pueden encontrar y estaremos siempre, pues lo más pronto posible, ayudándolas y auxiliándolas y cualquier cosa. Sí, claro, Camila, podemos hablar y bueno, les voy a enviar, no les he enviado la grabación pasada, pero se las debo y les debo también esta, ¿verdad? Entonces no crean que se me ha olvidado y les voy a compartir un video que es también bastante, bueno, que a mí en lo particular me gusta mucho verlo, que para que lo vean y lo podamos comentar un poquito en la sesión 5. La sesión 5 es precisamente cómo actuar como un navegador. Vamos a hablar de recursos. Yo sé que a lo mejor hoy te quedaron muchas cosas en el aire, pero en la siguiente sesión vamos a tratar de aterrizarlas precisamente para que puedan concluir estas cinco sesiones sobre nuestro entrenamiento. Entonces les quiero agradecer mucho su presencia. Como dijo Amy, es un tema difícil, pero tratemos de verlo con un lado positivo y siempre con ahora sí que el conocimiento y la perspectiva de que pues tenemos que aprender a cómo resolver esto para ayudar a nuestra comunidad y a los otros que nos rodean. Entonces, muchísimas gracias por el día de hoy, por asistir y recuerden, nos vemos la próxima semana en punto de las 2 para nuestra última sesión de entrenamiento. Muchas gracias a mis compañeras, a nuestras traductoras, a Amy y a todos ustedes. Gracias. Gracias a ti, Luz.
Noemí, soy Camila.
Camila, dime.
¿Puedo
Sí, claro.
preguntarte aquí una vez? Ah, ok. Oye,
Sí, sí.
es que en esta semana hice mi lección 4 igual como cada semana, pero al final, cuando me quise ir al quiz, me dice, no puedes hacer el quiz hasta que termines el de la lección 3. Entonces me regresé, dije, a lo mejor algo me faltó. Y me fui directamente al quiz de la lección número 3 y lo volví a hacer y me dijo que estaba todo bien y le di completar. Y ahora sí ya me fui a la lección 4, quise volverlo a intentar y me dice lo mismo.
Parece que creo que Ana encontró un glitch por ahí, ¿verdad? Ana, tú eres la experta ahí en esa área.
Oh,
Gracias.
Gracias. Ya. Disculpa que tú no fuiste la única que me mandó un mensaje, ay, que no puedo tomar el quiz 4 porque ya sabían que habían completado el resto de las cosas. Y yo tuve que refrescar una configuración y ya está todo arreglado. Ya puedes ir a tomarlo.
Entonces
¿Ok?
nada más me meto y hago el quiz
Ya.
y...
Sí.
Ok, súper. Ok. Ay, qué alivio.
Cualquier
Muchísimas
cosa,
gracias,
nos
muchachos.
mandando mensajes, cualquier cosa.
Claro que sí. Gracias a todas. Feliz fin de semana y nos vemos el próximo.